How did this get started in high school bands? My halftime show's better than yours. No, it's not. Our band's better than yours. And yeah, okay, so let's go compete.
The pleasure of the host of the band director. They are the boss. They direct the music education in school and on the field, and I'm just making suggestions.
So Cavalcade getting started 60 years ago, my best knowledge comes from the guys who were a generation ahead of me. Those are the guys who were involved, some of them from the very beginning.
The story I had always gotten about Cavalcade was it started in 1959 when a group of band directors got together and realized there's got to be something better. There has to be something better than dog show judges, car show judges. We need music judges. We need people who understand. We need designers of drill and of color guard to judge what they're seeing.
Arlen Saylor, who had an amazing band program at Boyertown, decided to run a show in what's now called the 422 corridor that would bring bands together to perform. My high school band director, Hal James, was one of the first of those at Springford. Frank Ferrero at Boyertown Junior High participated back in that era, before he went to Wilson West Lawn. Mr. Saylor called it a cavalcade of bands, a catchy term. There was a TV show called the Cavalcade of Stars at the time. I'm dating myself, but I've heard of that show. Cavalcade of Bands, he called his local show. Eventually, that became a little group of bands, not really organized, where the chief judge would be hired by a host. Maybe a school, maybe a Lions Club, maybe a Rotary Club would run a show, much like a drum corps show in that era.
They decided right then and there the Cavalcade of Bands was born. It was incorporated within days, and those band directors signed that incorporation.
Number one, they decided to form it as a directors association right from the get-go. For me, that was huge. And I think that you can see that that still to this day has a difference, that it's really a program that's really tried to develop leadership skills in the directors and the administrators that are part of the program itself. That was one of the things I really liked about the Cavalcade all these years, is that it is run by the directors.
Everything doesn't have to be competitive, but everything can be. We've all met a certain standard. And I think Cavalcade really tries to emulate that. And it is a competitive activity. It is part of what we do. But as directors, how you handle that to me is the most important part. So that's something to me that sets Cavalcade apart from a lot of other circuits.
What really makes Cavalcade unique is the fact that it's run by directors. They're vested in the rules and the regulations and the growth and the development of the association, but they also let other people run the day-to-day work, and I think that that's probably the biggest asset of the association.
As the organization grew, it needed some guidelines and some guidance, and so a gentleman by the name of Bill Lawler stepped in and was appointed the Commissioner of Bands, I think was actually his title. Eventually, by the mid-1970s, Cavalcade elected a president, had a chief judge, organized rules and regulations, constitution, bylaws, everything that was necessary, and became a functioning organization run by band directors.
Back in that day, there were very few high school bands that competed, very few. They competed in parades, but not field competitions. They were very rare, particularly out in the Harrisburg area.
I was hired at Plymouth Whitemarsh in '67, and Ron Holly, who was the high school band director, was hired at the same time. We heard about this band competition. I believe it was at Upper Moreland High School, and were very impressed with the bands at that time. It was, I think, Boyertown, Upper Moreland, Owen J. Roberts, the really big bands, and Wilson. So we thought this is something that we should get into. We also noticed that in addition to what I knew then as an honor guard and a banner, they had these things called flags and rifles and majorettes. And I said, what's majorettes doing with this?
When I started to judge, I got my certification with Mid-Atlantic, and Mid-Atlantic was the exclusive judging organization for Cavalcade.
As far as I know, the first championship show was held in the fall of 1970 by Mid-Atlantic Judges Association, but it was a Cavalcade of Bands championship. It was held in Harrisburg's Farm Show Arena. I attended that show. I was a college student, and there were probably 12 to 20 bands there. So after the marching band and football seasons were over, bands had to rewrite their show. The larger bands had to rewrite their show to fit inside the farm show.
The judges were not cavalcade judges. They were very military, and they were very strict. I think a lot of them came off of VFW posts and that kind of thing.
You had to have your credentials. You had to have taught. They wanted to know who you taught and who you marched with and all those kind of things. There was some training, and you learned a whole lot about the manual of arms. I can't even remember the document name, but it defined squads and files and platoons, and you needed to be able to recite all that kind of stuff. After your schooling, there was some trialing.
Trialed in the fall of 75. In that era, you trialed for a season, 3 trials, and then you were either added to the judging list or not.
I did my student teaching back here at Calico High School with Jeff Wise, and he was going to start judging, and he and I trialed together, and we both started judging in 1979 together, and I kept it going until last year was my last year judging.
I came to Cavalcade through Mid-Atlantic Judges. That's how I got introduced. I took trials with Mid-Atlantic. They liked my trials, and they started hiring me. And then what we were doing, they were connected with Cavalcade, and then I became a Cavalcade judge.
Cavalcade dismissed itself or released itself from the Mid-Atlantic Judges Association, which really was running the circuit, to their own Judges Association, Cavalcade of Bands Judging Association, and we all moved from being only Mid-Atlantic judges to Mid-Atlantic and Cavalcade judges.
I think a year or so later, we started competing, and the first score that we got at that time when we competed was 38.5 out of 100. And the reason, because of that, Paul, was they used what was called the tick system.
Tick system, boy, the tick system. That was, you held it up, and you hoped the lighting was good, and you could see where you were, and you had to remember to draw the line in between, and you had to do all that kind of stuff. And it went from the tick system, and then you could do block ticking and group ticking, and then Cavalcade came up with this great idea that, people got, they could see what was going on in the sheet, and they didn't like that, so they gave you a clicker. And so instead of doing ticks, you'd do a clicker. But they put a tape over the clicker so you couldn't see how many clicks you had.
Right, you would identify a mistake, and then that was 1/10 of a point on the clicker, and then at the end you would show your clicker to the chief judge, and he would write down, and that would be your score.
That didn't last long because they found out that people, particularly the music judges, more than the visual judges, if somebody was doing up-tempo music, boy, you could click right along with that music and find a whole bunch of stuff wrong.
And I remember my first trial plays, I found my finger was clicking to the pulse of the band.
The biggest change came in when everything went to verbalization, when you could talk about what you were seeing. You could talk about it all. We used to write everything.
They were so open to listening to any ideas you might have had because of the band directors, organizing this and wanting to get things right.
I think when it got to the tapes changed it for the best because you could actually react particularly if you were doing a GE caption. You could react. And so much more information got to the units once they could hear themselves and hear the judges react as they were performing.
I realized, there are a lot of good bands here. Now, that was early. That was the 70s. What brought me to Cavalcade as a member director, they had positive and core values that I really related to.
I grew up in an area, of course, that in those days, back in the 70s, Charlie Brody at Hanover was the big name in marching band activity and the Hanover band. And I was looking for something for my band in addition to supplement the football games, the parades, the Halloween parade, and so forth. And the more I talked with not only Charlie, but some of the other band directors in the area, the name Cavalcade, of course, cropped up, and I did a little bit of studying about it and felt that it was an organization that promoted student growth, a good place for competition, but at the same time, a learning situation, education for the kids. Like we'd say, the rest is history. After that, for the next 33 years, I was true blue Cavalcade.
What I remember is, and frankly, a major portion of what attracted me to Cavalcade was that the band directors themselves had so much input in the management and operation of the organization. It was really a wonderful opportunity for the band directors to have input as to how the organization was managed.
I grew up competing in Cavalcade. It was where most of the bands in our area did, and the fact that the association was run by the band directors was definitely a big factor for me too.
I've had a long history with the Cavalcade. Way back to my early days, actually when I was a student at Westchester University, and as you well know or may not know, Jim Wells was one of the primary members of that early leadership group that really started to put the whole Cavalcade, the marching piece together. Westchester University was in on the ground floor of that. We had always hosted a show. We made sure that the ensemble was a part of the championships that they did, even in the early to mid 70s.
The other thing, coming into Cavalcade, bringing the band into judged evaluation really made my job a lot easier, which I discovered after entering competition, because the kids knew they had to take it a lot more seriously. Rehearsals became so much more productive. Our band actually grew.
It was also in the, early 70s, and we all had jazz bands, and there was very few places where they would have contests, so to speak, or ratings. The score sheets they had and the point system at that time, because they were all independent shows, there was no organization. You could do three songs the whole year, which was not very educational. And being with Cavalcade, that was one of our things, is to make this educational. Cavalcade asked if we could put something together as the separate. So I remember Steve Leonard and I sitting in my apartment living room for many hours, coming up with bylaws, score sheets, and a better judging system. And then more bands put on to the system. We eventually had championships, which we added best sections to, which the others, I don't believe the other early jazz shows did, and best soloist. And it just seemed to take off, and that's where we are today. I think we have like 80 or 90 high school bands that are involved with our program, one way or another.
We had an unfortunate incident at Wilson. The band director, Bruce Silfies, fell off of the conductor's podium and broke a leg, broke a hip or something like that. And of course, they asked if I would mind stepping in and taking over for a short period of time. Well, a short period of time lasted until I think 1998. And so I was the president for those 14 years, a rich history of working with great people.
I grew up and came up through the ranks, so to speak, in the Cavalcade system, starting in about 1976. I was a secretary for a short time. I was a marching band committee chairperson, and I also served as president for a short term.
I want to preface anything, it really wasn't me that changed it, but the board and the body that we had at that particular time. But it was, as we talked earlier, it was a massive laundry list that we sort of tackled in those years.
That was a matter of organizing and collating all the suggestions following the season from all the directors, looking at all the rules, regulations, bylaws and such, and evaluating their effectiveness and whether they were worth keeping or whether something should be changed, and then entertaining a rules congress meeting where everyone got together and decided what stays and what comes and what goes.
My philosophy has always been you're either part of the problem or part of the solution. So I felt if I wanted to have quality judging and I felt I could provide that, then I needed to be out there.
The biggest issue every year, of course, was classification. And when I first came in, it was a 6 or 7 point formula.
Back in those days, in the early 80s, classification was very different. There was a formula for classification. So we were a very large band from a very small school.
Everything from the size of your band to the size of your color guard to your average score at championships, what conference you were in last year at championships. And then, of course, it also includes your school size.
I thought one of the things that I really liked about that, though, was it was really a learning process back then. So even if you were a band of 150 or 160, you could have been in independence in the lower classification because you were really just starting to learn about the activity itself and trying to really get your footing along the way.
Of course, we added percussion judges and auxiliary judges, which and we also we used to have 4 judges on the field in my early days of competing, and now we got away and just had a music and a visual X-person on the field for a number of years.
In the early 80s, I was the Cavalcade Indoor Drill Association president for 2 years. I don't remember which years it was. It could have been 82 and 83, could have been 81 and 82. Cavalcade's indoor seasons went really, really well. We had our championships at Kutztown those years. Had a lot of guards. Back then it was novice guards and advanced guards and novice twirlers and advanced twirlers.
Cavalcade had a very large contingent of majorettes, the indoor majorettes, and some of those were just spectacular groups. I can remember. When indoor started, particularly in Cavalcade, maybe others, but I was only judging Cavalcade, wouldn't necessarily be a soundtrack. It'd be the band. And the band would come sit in the back stands or stand on the back sideline, and the band would play, and the color guard would do their show to live music.
And somewhere around 83, 84, hey, could we put a drum line on the floor? Would that be kind of fun? I said, yeah, if we can find, time to practice, yeah. So they put a show together, put it on the floor, and it's a worldwide thing now with drum lines.
The biggest thing, again, was just the opportunity to take my group out, and every other week or so when we would go out, just to run up against some of the big names who, of course, when I came into Cavalcade, it was all about Shikellamy and North Bend and Siderton and Plymouth Whitemarsh. I mean, those are the big names. And, of course, again, because we were York, Adams County, we didn't have any of that background or anything. So it gave us an opportunity to really compete and learn lots. And I probably, in my first 5 years, probably learned 100 times more than what I knew, going in.
We had different directors come and go through the years, and a lot of them had different ideas of improving. And if they made sense, it would be a vote by the majority of the members of Cavalcade.
Classification would be the biggest for me. When we switched from the formula system, which had always controversy with it and all that stuff, and how much do you weight this and all that sort of thing. And then when it went to, let's put your 75 kids up against my 73 kids.
Some of the biggest things that I have seen change are the move from the tick system into the subjective system, where we build up the students rather than take down the students, and build up the programs.
And I was so thankful when we were able to drop that as a mechanism to really evaluate bands and really be able to talk a little bit more from an educational side.
So I think the Cavalcade idea was more, as I said, more educational and build up. And that process, I think, made the bands better. I know it did.
Cavalcade, in the continuous effort to find the perfect classification system, had a classification system for a while that, instead of it being based on numbers or based on anything, it was based on how well you were doing that year and somebody's opinion of how well they thought you might do by the end of the year. Unfortunately, any time it's based on somebody's opinion, that allows somebody to think that, well, maybe it's politics involved or something else. But what the worst part about that is, and I was involved with one particular band that this happened to, is halfway through the season, they were said, no, you're not going to be an X band, you're going to be Y. And, well, wait a minute, championships, we're already booked for championships on the day that we can't come on that day because there's other activities at the school booked. And so in that particular year, and I think they were defending champions on that year, they weren't even able to come compete the next year because their classification was changed. That caused a lot of bands to leave Cavalcade, and that was really a period of time in there where Cavalcade had some of those issues. Now, Cavalcade fixed it very quickly thereafter, but the damage was done. It took a long time.
Prior to my administration involvement, there was a period of time where Cavalcade was fairly low in membership. And through the efforts primarily of Mitch Adams, my predecessor as executive director, he was able to bring it out of that era and increase bands, increase visibility, increase participation.
I remember when I was president that we found out at the last minute that we couldn't have Hershey Stadium for championships. So it was a special project indeed to find a location to do championships, and we finally were able to do that at Ben Salem High School.
In the spring of 2000, Ken Hustler was the outgoing president. Ken and his board thankfully had reorganized the Constitution and bylaws. We were at about 30 bands at the time, and I called each band director, each member director, at least once to see if they would serve on the board. We were finally lucky enough to assemble a board of directors, and I was elected president. We inherited an organization that was very low on funds. Neighboring bands, their directors in the Lancaster area had told them that we were going out of business, shutting down, bankrupt, you name it. There were 3 divisions of Cavalcade: marching, jazz, and indoor. The 3 were totally separate entities. They did not exist under a common umbrella. We inherited an association that had gone from about 70 or 80 members in the 1970s, maybe a few more, maybe a few less, to about 30. Our first championship show was at J.P. McCaskey High School in Lancaster. We had 28 bands participate, and we reorganized classes for where they performed so that they could go to the TOB, so that some of the bands could go to the evening TOB chapter event. So we were struggling.
I think it was because of the values of what Cavalcade gave to my band and that I could see they were giving to other bands. So once I graduated, I started teching or working with the marching area for different schools that were in Cavalcade because I wanted to stay in that atmosphere. I thought it was pretty cool.
With Chuck Sia's retirement, we advertised and searched for a new executive director. We appointed Mitch Adams, who seemed like the perfect person at the time.
Back then, Cavalcade was not what Cavalcade is today. Cavalcade was a much smaller organization. We might have had one show a weekend, and I think even some weekends weren't even filled. So it was much smaller than what it was. I have a marketing background, so I thought I'll go in and see what I can do to build things up.
The bylaws would say this, but the Constitution would say that. Or this part of the bylaws would say this, but another part would say that, because they had never been cleaned up. They just kept adding to them through Rules Congress. So Ken's board got that straightened out. So we had a baseline.
Basically, I looked at what product do we have, what do other circuits have, and I didn't want to look at the other local circuits to us. I wanted to look around the country and see how they dealt with things and how they dealt with a band director run organization. So my first thing was to hire people into the administration that I knew I could deal with really well.
Myself and one of the coordinators would go and meet with directors.
I started questioning different band directors that had great schools, great stadiums. Would you like to host a show? What I usually got back was, if you can promise me 12 to 15 bands, I'm in. Sometimes I would promise them 12 to 15 bands just so they'd be in, and then I'd make sure we gave them at least 10 or 12 bands that they could deal with, that they could see we meant business.
The best advice we got from those was at a meeting in Westchester where John Villella attended and said, we had just finished at McCaskey. The year before that, we had been at Red Lion, and the year before that, we had been at Ben Salem for championships. John's advice, quote, was, you guys got to get a championship site.
When I first got into it, the early years, the late 70s, were all in the Vet Stadium in Philadelphia. After a couple, 3 years down there, the expense of renting that stadium became really cost prohibitive. And we spent 1 year at Franklin Field in Philadelphia, which of course had no warm-up area. You were out on the streets right outside the stadium. We were out in a little side alley warming up, and I mean, it was really, really crazy.
Championships started in Hershey around 78, shortly after the big Philadelphia years, at the Vet and at maybe Franklin Field, I'm not sure. Had been at Hershey, we lost Hershey. We went to high school stadiums. We researched, we wound up at J. Bernie Crum in the fall of 2000. We went from 28 bands to 35. Chuck Sia, who had just retired as executive director, made the phone call. We got back into Hershey. From then on, coming back to Hershey, being closer to larger bands and being at a major site that had more fun things to do, really got us back on track.
Did it all without email. That's funny. I guess I started in December of 2000, going into January of 2001. And the first thing I basically begged and pleaded for was for us to start a website where we could have email.
Our very first website that was created by Hall of Fame member Ed Stimson debuted in January of 2001. And I wish I had a history document or a screen capture of those pages, because I remember it being very functional but very rudimentary, but it got the job done, and it was revolutionary for us at the time.
I put together a 5-year plan of things I wanted to accomplish, and some of those might have been very, very minimal. Like, I wanted to go in the first year, the second year, the third year, I wanted to go to practically every member school during one of their practices, especially in the evening, and just introduce myself. So the kids could see who I was, the staffs could see who I was, the parents could see who I was. So if they had any questions of the circuit whatsoever, I could answer them.
The next important thing that the board did, that our board did, was to establish values and stay with them. What the Constitution and bylaws said is what we did.
Also, in that same 5-year period, when I was a kid, there were 4 different classes. There was Independence, American, Liberty, and Yankee. And over time, Cavalcade had dropped out the Liberty class. So I wanted to reestablish that, and I also wanted to put a 5th class above Yankee for the much bigger size bands called Patriot. So we were able to accomplish all that.
At the same time, I called a friend of mine who had been active in Leadership Lancaster. And this gentleman was strong in the world of business. I asked him to lead us through reorganizing some things because of the new person, the new executive director. What he did was led us through a major reorganization, institutional reorganization, and it was beautiful. It is the best $100 Cavalcade ever spent in a consulting fee.
Well, I was very fortunate to come in after Bill Powers, who was such a stabilizing force with Cavalcade, put a lot of work in to rebuild that. He and Mitch Adams were a huge part of helping that happen. When I was at the time at Unionville High School, we were not a competitive marching band. We did some jazz festivals, but we were not a competitive group with marching. And we started doing some competing, and Mitch wanted us to come to Cavalcade. And there were some things I wanted to see change before I got Unionville into that, and some of those things when Bill and Mitch came in did change. And I ended up taking Unionville to Cavalcade shows and starting competing with them.
In the long run, over a period of years, people realized what the Cavalcade philosophy was all about and what it offered for students in terms of character development and teamwork and learning how to work together. And people came back.
The quality of judging increased. We put all 3 segments of Cavalcade under one umbrella.
As a president, a lot of it was just getting good people to come and do the roles that we needed. The biggest area I wanted to see improve was the quality of judging and judge training. And I think that really has, the last 15 years, the difference in Cavalcade is pretty significant.
When the association got big again, or bigger again, where you're up to about 100 bands, I think to add the A in the open classes, I think adds some help in terms of trying to make it a competitive piece, but one where people still feel like they can be in the mix, if you will.
The A and the open, I believe strongly that those classifications are beneficial to everybody, to the school, to the band director, to the young people. I definitely believe that.
Some of the biggest changes, well, technology is one of them, not only with the performing groups, but with the judging aspect of Cavalcade.
Right as I was getting out in 2008, we were starting to toy with amplifying the pits, the mallets especially, and so forth. And then Saturday night, I mean, there wasn't a group there, and we had 9 bands, I think, 10 bands. Everybody came out with their speakers on the 40 and the 40, microphones, boom microphones facing the field, picking up instruments all over the field. I was just sort of surprised to see how far that had its come.
The other thing is the evolution of the visual aspect of things. I mean, playing instruments is playing instruments. And of course, you have the addition of the electronics and all that stuff. That's a huge thing. And the amplification, that was a huge change to the whole system. And I'm still thinking that it's still working itself out, even though it's almost a requirement now, pretty much.
I think one of the biggest changes right away was Competition Suite and going digital. Because I can still remember being that, field tech and being sent by the band director to go stand on the sideline and wait for a bag of tapes.
Moving from a tape recorder to a digital recorder to now being able to record into your phone and iPad. And that's all accomplished through an incredible cloud-based program called Competition Suite.
I had worked with Matt Becker, who founded Competition Suite, for quite a few years at DCI, and I thought that from a communication standpoint, it gets rid of a lot of the hassle with judge recordings. You used to have to get the tapes, go back First thing you had to do was rewind it without killing your battery, which if your battery was low, you were really hesitant in doing, or go hop in your car and put them in your dashboard so you could listen to them, which was just crazy when you think about it. And now, before you even get off the field, you get a text and it says your recordings are ready.
We use that for not only our judges' commentary, but also for our scoring, and everything is done real time.
When that tabulator hits release, scores pop up on the website, and we start to see things a little differently than what we used to.
When I first started, we were putting a number down on a piece of paper. We would put it on our tote sheet, and we would put that page into the tabulator. She would calculate the score, and that number was gone, and I could never use it again, and I couldn't change it. Now, I don't have to lock those numbers in with the equal advantage scoring system. I get to see everybody before I say, yes, that's what I want. So some of the old cliches that you used to hear in judging where if you were on first, I had to hold my numbers, or I boxed myself in, or all these number cliches that used to be more readily heard in critiques and everything, it's gone.
We still say, did you listen to the judges' tapes? And we haven't used tapes in 8 years? You can't throw the tape out the window anymore if you don't like what the judge had to say. Not that people did that, but just saying. There's probably a few along the Pennsylvania Turnpike from people that I know.
I wanted to show eventually the world who Cavalcade was. Going back to my high school band director, Charlie Brody, I find out once he retired, he became a travel agent.
When we first started talking to people from Travel Galley, Charlie Brody, Frank Fish, Mitch and I were talking with them. So we originally tried to do a band that was going to go to Costa Rica and play down in Costa Rica, and it just didn't seem to work out, didn't fit for what our members were looking for.
And I said, but if you ever have anything else, let me know. We could be open for it. And before I even hung up, he said, why don't we go out to the Rose Parade? And I said, the Rose Bowl. Very quickly got corrected. It's not the Rose Bowl parade. It's the Rose Parade, or the Tournament of Roses parade. So presented that to the board, presented that to the membership. They were sold, and off we went.
We joke all the time that the band got accepted to go to the Rose Parade, and we didn't even have a band, because we didn't. We had an idea, and we sat in the Pepper offices that used to be in Paoli, and I sat there and made this video. We didn't have a recording, we didn't have a picture, we didn't have a video, we didn't have uniforms, we didn't even have kids. We had nothing. But what we basically did was we sent them an idea. And for some reason, they trusted us.
So within less than a year and a half, 2 years, I think it was, we got a staff together, we got buses, we got planes, we got a uniform put together very quickly and very easily in today's standards.
We worked with Stanbury Uniforms and had a custom uniform designed for us with pockets in the chest and in the gauntlets and in the hat so we could put live roses on the uniform. Something that we don't think anyone else had ever done. And in 2015, we were called the Flower Band. And it was just a striking visual image walking down Colorado Boulevard with not only the members, but also 18 or so roses on every member's uniform. We were able to provide students in smaller band programs who would never have the opportunity to march in that parade, now an opportunity to do so.
And next thing we know, we're off to Pasadena, California, marching in the granddaddy parade of them all that's shown all over the world. And all of a sudden it made me, once we landed in California at the airport, I realized, wow, the world's gonna know who Cavalcade of Bands is.
And we went out there and kind of blew the roof off the place. We weren't the biggest, I think we were like the second smallest band, but you wouldn't know it from watching us in the parade. And it was a very overwhelming experience. We became quite the buzz of that festival out there. This idea that marched in the Rose Parade in 2015. And then we figured, let's see if they'll take us again. And they did.
Smith and Romano,
attorneys at law.
We will get you that settlement.
That was good.
Hello, I'm Paul Smith.
And I'm Anton Romano.
And we are
Smith and Romano.
we're kidding.
It's funny.
Smith and Romano are great band directors, and we're just kidding.
Yeah.
Seriously. They're not attorneys.
The cool opportunity that came along after becoming president was getting a chance to tag along on the Tournament of Roses trip. Having kind of come into that, this would have been the second time we went on this trip, and I mean, I didn't really know what I was getting myself into, but the moment I think that was really kind of cool to me is that just looking up and down Colorado Boulevard, I was like, here we are. We arrived at this awesome event for these kids. Once in a lifetime for them, and for me, it was just really, really awe-inspiring.
And I'm very proud of the whole team that continued that and maintained that, and I hope it's something that the Cavalcade is involved with for many years to come.
That was probably the most sensitive I became within my tenure than I had been in that whole 14 years I was involved. Because all of a sudden I realized the name's going to be out there, and it just brought me to tears.
There's a thing that I learned a long time ago called growth is not an option. And I think that that's what happens with the Cavalcade of Bands because of the way they're organized and set up and the things that they put together. Every year, it gets better and better. Every bit of the organization, and certainly, oh my goodness, the jazz band.
One of the secrets of Cavalcade is our jazz division. In my opinion, our jazz division is probably the best jazz association circuit on the East Coast.
I promise you, I'm telling you the truth. If I had only one thing to judge, and they said you couldn't judge anything else, it would be the jazz band.
Very exciting to hear the top bands from Philadelphia. Lancaster has good jazz bands, Reading has great jazz bands, Philadelphia has exceptional jazz bands in their high schools.
From a judging perspective, it's a lot more relaxed because jazz in general is more relaxed. It's very tough to do a rank and rate.
It's not just 3 or 4 bands that are good. Each year, that circle gets bigger and bigger, and it's a tough job sometimes when you're judging. It's not that easy.
It's more of a festival rating system. So it's really, you're just judging the band against themselves as opposed to against others. So there's much less in the way of a comparative nature.
For us, we've always gone out to some of the local exhibitions, and knowing what we have with the whole motto of education through musical involvement has been kind of big for us. So now for the last 2 years and going into this coming year, we're hosting a jazz show at Big Spring. Even though our jazz circuit really is southeastern Pennsylvania and Jersey, getting that expansion into south central Pennsylvania has been kind of neat for us. And it's giving our local schools that may not have even had that opportunity to do it a chance to see what Cavalcade offers.
Very different judging staff. We're very blessed to have some of the best performers in the country with us on the East Coast. These are folks that play, guys and gals that have played with Sinatra, have played with Maynard Ferguson, the big names of the jazz world, some of them Eminem. It's just amazing the professional musicians that we have and the level that they've played at, and they're working with our folks.
When I was the director at Westchester University, there was nothing more exciting for me than to watch all of those students appreciate what my band was doing on the field. For me, when I was the band director, one of the most important things that I think we did as a university ensemble was perform for high school students. I think one of the best ways that we recruit is to actually be there and actually have those students have an opportunity to hear and see what that program is all about. And the reward there was watching the faces of my students coming off the field going, yes, we did it, and people are acknowledging what we're doing. There's a scholarship that's to this day is between Westchester University and the Cavalcade of Bands, and we're excited that we have students that come to the university that bring the background of the Cavalcade Association with them, and we know that they're going to become good contributing members to the university band program along the way. All those years that we were able to come to the championships and or host a show and be able to do an exhibition for the high school students was just really rewarding experience. And I know that we're glad that we can help to host one of those championships again. It's important for me when I was the band director, and I think for those students it was great for them to see that that music goes on. You know, you talk about the Cavalcade is, education through musical involvement. I can think of nothing more important than for a student to graduate from high school, and if they do choose to go on to college, to continue that musical experience in some way or another, because we know that their chances of graduating are going to be exponentially better, that their GPA is probably going to be better, they're going to form relationships and friendships that are going to last a lifetime. All those things are great things that they're going to get because they're part of a unit or an organization at the university level, which is going to really keep them connected to the university and throughout their lives, to be real honest.
I was a young judge when the Hall of Fame started. Sometime in the late 1970s or early 1980s, judging championships when Frank Ferrero was inducted. I immediately knew that the Hall of Fame, the Cavalcade Hall of Fame, was inducting people who were impressive, prominent, gave so much to kids over the years. And I nominated several people for the Hall of Fame.
Of course, in 2004, being selected for the Hall of Fame was a great night. My family was there, my wife, my daughters, who were all three Cavalcade members in my band.
It was quite an honor at that time, and there was some fabulous other people before me that were mentioned and named in that. I think at that time, Dr. Richard Scott put me up for that and so on.
The vice president kind of handled Hall of Fame nominations, so I got an opportunity to deal with that for a few years. I know one of the big ones was this year that Denny Schneider was inducted into the Hall of Fame.
I was so blown away when you asked me to become a member of the Hall of Fame last year. That was one of the biggest honors of my life, so I just wanted to say thank you to you again.
So when I got the call, my last year of teaching, the summer before my last year of teaching, that I was elected to the Hall of Fame, I was speechless. A great honor in my career. I have had a few other things at that level, but not many. So, Cavalcade Hall of Fame. I still volunteer at championships, and when I do, I wear my Cavalcade lapel pin that we developed as a recruiting tool, as an awareness tool, when I was first president, and also my Hall of Fame pin.
I see nothing but positive things coming up for the organization. It's not about the numbers. It's not. It's about the relationships that are created. It's about the education that is met. It's about the determination from one lone student who never thought they could do what they just did on a field.
I think the great thing about this organization is that it's director-driven. My hope is that many more and many new directors will become more involved. They're the ones that make it happen and set the rules and tell the administrators what they want us to be doing.
I'm hopeful that the organization can grow because I know the values of the organization. I know the quality of the evaluation that school programs are going to receive, and I believe so much in education through musical involvement.
To me, what Cavalcade always offered was the opportunity for students to find out just how really good they could be when they make a commitment to the rest of the team members in their group and work to be the very best that they can be.
I find that the expectation of us in Cavalcade, those people that are judging for Cavalcade, is one that we're going to be that clinician. That at the end of the day, our clinician job is an important one.
Cavalcade has touched more lives. I am not talking about people who go on to have music degrees, understood, and it's a great way to build their foundation. I'm talking about people who you're preparing for life. And all the things that I alluded to earlier about caring, about goal-oriented, about overcoming adversity, dealing with failure, all those things prepare them for the next stage.
Just wanted to, thank Paul for making this possible and to give me the opportunity just to thank the Cavalcade. Like I said, it was all I did for 30 some odd years. You could talk to my wife, she would tell you that was all I did for all those years. Just hoping that it will be there to afford the kids and the directors what I was able to gain in my time spending in the association, because it was just, the best part of my life.
I could be at a local show through the course of the season. There were major moments where parents would come up to me and thank me for having this organization that their kids could be involved in.
I really felt that the directors were friends, and we could joke around and needle each other at times, but we all knew that, we were all in this for the kids.
Being able to experience what the directors and the staffs and the students are feeling from the sideline when it's not your own band. I love that moment. Like, especially at awards, when you have all the seniors from all the schools out and seeing some of the emotional reactions that these kids have, knowing that it's their last championship, it's really kind of a neat way to experience it.
Cavalcade has been just so important to so many of us, and it really has been part of our lives for so long. As members, as staff members, as administrators, as judges, as parents, it has been so important to us, and it is just a place that touches my heart.
When my two children, Kevin and Heather, started taking music actively, and then were part of the Pottsgrove High School marching band, Sue and I ended up teaching there together for the first time. Experiencing something like that for about 7 years with your life partner is pretty remarkable. And then on top of that, to be able to teach your two children was something that's really hard to put in words.
The friends that I have now, the folks that are in my life, whether they're by family or just friends, are people that started out of marching band, out of being involved in a musical activity in a high school.
There's so many options you had to do things with your students, and finding a place that you feel comfortable taking them from an education standpoint, competitive standpoint, all that is really important, because ultimately we answer to our kids and we answer to our band parents and our administrators. And I think you need to make sure wherever you go, the main reason for doing it is to give your kids a good quality experience, and that the competitive part of it, like I said, is important, but it shouldn't be what drives the bus. And I think that as long as Cavalcade keeps that in mind, I think they're always going to be very successful, and they'll always have a strong membership, because there is a place for that.
Coming out of the tunnel, whenever there was a championship at Vet Stadium with the kids, to see the excitement on their face, win or lose. After I retired from being a band director and so on, I was still glad to stay part of it and work with a good group of people throughout the years.
I love the fact that this is a director-oriented program and that the directors have the say about what they want to do. My wish is that every single director that is a part of the Cavalcade of Bands will find many peers or mentors that they can get over time so that they can become the best people that they can be.
As I look back on all of our interviews for this documentary and look at all of the historical documents, I'm very humbled with the position I'm currently in, and all the people and all the administrators that came before me to make sure that I'm in this position today. There has been some great times and some not so great times in the Cavalcade history. But if it weren't for all the people on this video, all of our Hall of Fame members, a whole lot of administrators, and a whole lot of retired band directors and current band directors, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about that. So it's very, very humbling and very empowering to make sure that I keep this torch moving forward. We lost a lot of our history over the years, and this is trying to bring it back, which I'm very, very excited about, because when you really start digging and reading about the Cavalcade history, it truly is an amazing journey.